the big breaking news tonight. California voters have rejected the recall effort against Governor Gavin Newsom.
Tonight, I'm humbled, grateful, but resolved.
We recognize that we lost the battle, but we are certainly going to win the war.
That's right. The smooth-talking millionaire governor of California, Gavin Newsom, has survived an attempt to boot him out of office. It means the Democrat can carry on leading the world's fifth biggest economy, now even larger than the United Kingdom. It also means he can carry on with his liberal policies, which affect the lives of 40 million Californians. Now, it's perhaps no surprise that he won, given that Democrats are apparently outnumbering Republicans in California 2-1. However, the anger towards him was and still is very strong. Remember, around 2 million Californians signed a petition to get rid of Newsom, complaining he'd taken the shine off the once golden state.
California's recall election is entering its last stretch. The election over recalling Governor Gavin Newsom will be held on September 14th.
The Democratic darling now finds himself in a fight for his political survival.
It is the result of a petition that gained more than 2.1 million signatures in support of recalling Newsom.
In California, we have these rules that allow you to call a special election if you gather signatures from voters.
We have recall petitions circulating literally all the time.
I covered one of your recalls before in California, and at the end of it, there was a brand new Republican governor.
One and only Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Are you worried?
Absolutely, we're taking it seriously. This election is a matter of life and death. Public health is on the ballot.
This was an election driven by the pandemic, by frustration over businesses that were closed, schools that were closed.
I just want to survive for my family. I have 2 kids. Please open up.
I think that the people are dissatisfied with what's going on here in California.
How did he get himself in this situation?
The governor ate dinner at a posh restaurant in Napa Valley at a time when he was telling everyone else to be home. A lot of people took it out on the governor and signed the recall petition.
I think it's highly hypocritical of him.
He has failed to manage that state, and that's really what this entire election is about.
What the Republicans are doing is simply a power grab.
We will defeat this Republican-backed recall.
Race has become almost entirely now about 2 people, Governor Newsom and conservative talk show host Larry Elder.
Gavin Newsom has done a good job for the people of California. You won't hear that because he hasn't. Not on crime, not on homelessness, not on the quality of public education. This man has been an absolute disaster.
I think there's a lot of change that needs to happen in California, so I'm very grateful for it.
This is an overwhelmingly Democratic state.
I think he's done a good job with the COVID response. I'd like to see him continue his term.
There are 2 Democrats almost for every 1 Republican in California. If they turn out at their size, the governor keeps his job.
And that's exactly what did happen. He did keep his job. About 2/3 of voters voting no to removing him, and about 1/3 voting yes. But the fact that it even got to a vote tells you quite a lot. Every governor since the 1960s has faced attempts to recall them, but Newsom is only the 2nd governor in the state's history to face a vote on it. The other was Gray Davis in 2003. He lost his recall vote and was replaced by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I want to be the governor for the people. I want to represent everybody.
Well, the reason there's only ever been 2 recall votes is down to California's rules, which state that a vote can only be held if a petition is signed by enough verified voters to equal at least 12% of the votes cast in the last gubernatorial race. This petition, which was started before the pandemic hit, easily surpassed the 12% threshold of about 1.49 million signatures. In fact, over 1.7 million verified signatures were gathered by the March 17th deadline. It was all a bit slow going at first, with just 5,600 signatures by mid-November, but then something happened that turbocharged the whole process. On the 13th of November, state authorities told Californians not to gather with people outside their households, and yet, a few days later, photos emerged of the governor dining with lobbyists in an exclusive French restaurant in the Napa Valley. No masks and no social distancing.
There's one thing people don't tolerate, and it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. Nobody likes to see hypocrisy in their government officials.
Well, the recall movement was energized, and for a while, Newsom looked to be on the ropes. But the establishment always had his back. Big businesses gave his campaign millions of dollars. Netflix alone donated $3 million. And Democratic Party bigwigs came to his aid.
Hello, Californians. You've got a big choice to make by September 14th. Governor Newsom has spent the past year and a half protecting California communities. Now Republicans are trying to recall him from office.
They think if they can win in California, they can do this anywhere. Well, we will show them you're not going to get this done. Not here, never.
The leading Republican running for governor is the closest thing to a Trump clone that I've ever seen in your state. Can you imagine him being governor of this state? You can't let that happen.
And why are the heavyweight Democrats supporting Newsom? It's not because he's so great, but because they want to protect the Democrats' position in the Senate. You see, in the event that Dianne Feinstein, one of California's senators who's quite frail, should leave office early, it's the governor who gets to appoint her replacement. Here's Larry Elder's explanation.
All of these people are scared to death about one big thing, Mark. They couldn't care less about Gavin Newsom. They care about the 50-50 split in the Senate in Washington, D.C., and God forbid Governor Elder should replace Dianne Feinstein that nobody's seen in weeks. And I'm told she's in worse mental condition than Joe Biden. They're afraid I'm going to replace her with a Republican, which I most certainly would do, and that would be an earthquake in Washington, D.C.
But of course, the Democrats are now breathing a sigh of relief. Gavin Newsom is staying put. And in his victory speech, he said it was a win for all Californians.
I want to focus on what we said yes to as a state. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to diversity, racial justice.
Well, that's Gavin Newsom depicting himself as a champion of diversity, even though he is, like every Californian governor before him, a middle-aged white man. And bear in mind that had he been recalled, Larry Elder would have been the state's first black governor. Newsom went on to say his victory was good for kids, too.
I just think of our kids watching all of this. Nightly news, day in and day out. And I just wonder, I've got 4 young kids. Oldest about to turn 12 this weekend. And what they're growing up to. In a world where we're so divided, these kids increasingly fearful, isolated, disconnected. And we're teaching them that.
And Gavin Newsom is also teaching, by example, that if you're a millionaire governor of California, you get to dine in expensive restaurants without masks or social distancing, while telling everyone else to behave responsibly. Here's a final gem from Governor Newsom.
The former president put out saying this election was rigged. Democracy is not a football. You don't throw it around. It's more like a, antique vase. You can drop it and smash it in a million different pieces.
Democracy is like an antique vase. It sounded like someone was laughing in the background when he said that. But you know who wasn't laughing? America's mainstream media, who can't praise him enough.
Governor Newsom speaking tonight, saying voters voted yes to science, yes to vaccines. Dan, you saw that, just that cool, confident demeanor there.
Yeah, really, and he has the gift of gab, certainly, and this is a triumphant night for him. The line I particularly liked was, democracy is not a football to be tossed around, it's more like an antique vase. A clever line, and that speaks to so many people.
Well, that is the free press freely praising Gavin Newsom, but do our guests feel as warm and fuzzy? Time to bring them in. Steve Maviglio is a Democratic political strategist and former press secretary to Governor Gray Davis. Mike Netter is the co-founder of RecallGavin2020.com. They're both based in California, and to give us the perspective from Washington, we have TV journalist and political commentator Scotty Nell Hughes. Welcome to all three of you. Thanks for joining us here on The Nexus. Mike, I'd like to start with you. It was a huge effort by you to bring this recall vote to fruition, but it's failed. How do you feel?
actually feel pretty good, and this may sound strange, but what's important is that 2.1 million people had their voices heard by getting on the ballot. It's a great narrative that it's Republican versus Democrat. The reality is across California, it was all races, all creeds, and all political parties that got it on the ballot. Now, we got on the ballot for under $1 million, which is pretty phenomenal in politics today. And Newsom and his fellows came in with $60 million to defend the crown of him being governor. So the odds were against us getting on the ballot, and even greater against us getting this passed.
You want to paint it as a sort of David and Goliath fight. I can understand that. But isn't it the fact that majority of people prefer to have Gavin Newsom than to have one of your guys?
Here's the problem. The majority of people choose not to vote. The problem is that many people in California feel powerless. Look, in the presidential election, 18 million people voted. Last time Gavin ran for governor, only an aggregate 12.5 million people voted. This time it looks like the turnout was only about just under 10 million. So the reality is, as much as they talk about being a Republican recall, most of the Republicans didn't even come out and vote. Percentages are very popular in politics. I like to look at numbers. Gavin was reelected with about 42%, or not recalled, with 42% of the people that are registered to vote in California. California has a bigger chunk of people in the middle called no party preference between the Democrats and Republicans. We're generally the state of we don't care unless our house is on fire or the homeless are in front of us. And that's what it's growing to. And that's what got the recall on the ballot. Dissatisfaction with the Democrats, if you will, or the one-party rule, which has led the state for 40 years, and the problems are continuing to compound. It's nice to talk about it being ideology. It's really about trying to find practical solutions for California, and it got turned into an ideological warfare.
You were very passionate on stage addressing your supporters, trying to drum up support for your petition, which you did achieve, and that's pretty amazing stuff. But what was driving you? Why did you feel you wanted to get rid of Gavin Newsom?
Look, California has become, for these politicians, about politics. I've lived in California over 55 years. The reality is the politicians don't seem to care about California. Ms. Harris became senator for barely under a year, and she's running for president. Newsom, when he got elected governor, already reserved the website for running for president. It's time we got California politicians that care about California, and it's pretty obvious that most politicians don't. Let me give you an example. In this election, which just took place, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, came in. Ms. Harris, the VP, Bernie Sanders from Vermont, Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts. Where are the big Democratic politicians that have the belief of the public? Well, gee, there weren't any. So the reality is, as soon as the Democratic politician or Republican one, which we have very few of, becomes a rising star, they're out of here. They're on to Washington. We need people that care about Californians like the Californians that live here. That's what drives me.
Okay. Steve Maviglio, you were involved in a recall election yourself. Unfortunately for you, your candidate lost. What sort of a trauma is it for a candidate to have to do this in the middle of their term?
Well, you know, despite that attempt at painting this David versus Goliath, this was a $250 million waste of money. We had an election, speaking of short timelines, just over a couple of years ago where Gavin Newsom is in office, and we're having another one next year. So we have just squandered resources that could have gone to schools and healthcare and important things that he talks about on a useless waste of time to prove that California is not Texas.
Mike, waste of time, waste of money?
No, absolutely not. First off, California has a $272 billion budget. So it's nice to paint $250 million as a lot of money. That's barely a drop in the bucket. And may I add, under Gavin's watch, there's up to $31 billion of EDD fraud. Democracy, any voting, to paint it as a waste of money is an affront to voters. And it's that kind of hyperbole, if you will, that I think suppress people from voting. And by the way, Gavin himself, in his own reply in the petition a year ago, guesstimated the cost of an election, this special one, to be $80 to $100 million. It just shows, again, kind of bad budgeting, Gavin, which is the problem that the state has. I never, ever want to hear that any election, anything that exercises democracy, is a waste of money. Yes, there's another election. Should we eliminate elections altogether to save money?
Steve, that's a good point, isn't it? The Democrats are always saying how precious and sacred democracy is and elections are. And you're saying it wasn't really worth the money.
Absolutely not. There were 5 previous recall attempts against Gavin Newsom, including one literally months before he took office. All of them failed. This effort would have failed had it not been for a judge giving the sponsors of this one an extended period of time to collect signatures. And that's when they got the big money to put this on the ballot. You know, it's nice to say, oh, if people would just stand on the corner and collect signatures, that would be real direct democracy. But nothing has been put on the ballot that way for more than 2 decades, because this has become a big business. This has attracted Republican money from across the country. Mike Huckabee, Newt Gingrich, those kind of people all thought they could go behind the back in the will of the California voters that they made in a regular election to elect a governor.
But Steve, are you now questioning the judgment? Are you now questioning the judgment of the judge in question who granted an extension to the petition?
No, I'm not saying it was a good or bad decision. I'm just saying the only reason this election occurred is because of that extended length of time.
Okay, but those are the rules. Those are the rules. Scotty, let me just head over to D.C. for a second and bring Scotty in for the first time. Scotty, we know all the bigwigs from D.C. came in. Biden's words were something like, you know, the whole country's watching this, the whole world is watching this. Why was it so important for all of these stars of the Democratic Party to weigh in?
Well, I think you heard that type of speak coming from a politician who knew that his guy was going to win. Hence why you saw him heading to California at the last minute, as well as Kamala Harris and others, because it was pretty much from the very beginning an uphill battle. And I appreciate what Mike is doing. He obviously very much loves California. He is obviously very passionate about it. But there is a reality check that, once again, is being served to the Republicans. Guess what? California is so deeply blue that if you would have even been able to get this on the ballot, you still had such an uphill climb that it was going to be a very small chance, unrealistic chance. And I think most Republicans know the state, a state that has almost zero representation in the state legislature, that has 2 Democrat senators, that has this continuous Democrat agenda that is coming from the state. The good news for Republicans is that's also driving people from that state. Because you had in this last census, 182,000 Californians for the first time decided they no longer liked the policies of California, and they moved out. And the majority of them, guess where they moved?
Good question.
Texas,
well, that's a good
Tennessee,
point. Steve?
Florida.
Steve, why are people moving out of California?
Well, let's put that in perspective. We're a state of how many? 45 million people?
No, I think it's 39.5. No, 39.5. Can we all agree on that?
Yep.
And 182,000 was the net loss of people. It's the first time.
For the first time ever in history. In history, you got to have a reality check here.
What's your point?
Yeah, here's a reality check.
Many more people move in that were higher income, and they were more
they didn't
educated.
Though. They didn't move in. That's the thing. You had 182,000 loss. You had a loss.
About the influx. That is this myth that you people from D.C. who don't live here don't understand. There actually was an influx of people with higher incomes and higher education, and that's why we're #1 in the country in attracting venture capital and business.
But you didn't. That's the problem. That's the reason. Hold on one second. Let me finish my comments here on this state. Because here's the deal. Governor Newsom yesterday on the ballot was completely different from the Governor Newsom that we saw 6 months ago, 8 months ago, when it was actually getting the signatures and collecting. What you saw was Governor Newsom being who he is the best, a politician. And the same sort of restrictions that Governor Newsom, you say that this was, the Democrats are selling this as this was a mandate on the COVID protocols, that this showed that people supported. That's not what this showed, because that's not who Governor Newsom was yesterday on the ballot. Governor Newsom opened up schools on time, something that he had closed down all last year. He had the beaches open, something he closed down for a second wave last spring. Just these past few weeks, stimulus checks are going out to people within California. He was a politician. People were happy today, unlike they were 6 months ago.
People in elected office are politicians. You're correct about that. And if you think the COVID strategy of anybody in the world was consistent over the last 2 years, I think you're living on another planet.
Steve,
sorry,
Scotty, hang on a second. Scotty, we need to slow it down. Not all of our viewers know in depth about what's going on. You mentioned the stimulus checks. I think the implication there, Steve, was that Governor Newsom was bribing people to vote for him, essentially in an indirect fashion.
Yeah, and that's absolute nonsense, as anybody who lives here can tell you that. That legislation was passed long ago, and that's the time it took to get the checks out.
Mike, you live there?
Steve,
nonsense?
Everybody knew that schedule.
You could say only 182,000 net loss, but that's a net loss in a country which had its population grow by 20% since the last census, with companies like Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, etc., moving their headquarters. Yes, venture capital comes into the state. The rich have gotten richer, and they funded this election. As far as the $600 goes, that's a state law that isn't supposed to work that way. That balanced budget amendment is supposed to refund money equally to all the taxpayers. Gavin reshuffled it so he could refund $600 to people right before the election and actually didn't follow the law. But since we have an attorney general and other folks that are all one party, no one challenges Gavin. Look, the reality is we have one party rule in California. You know that. I know that. Everybody knows that. And when anytime you have one party that rules for too long, Democrat or Republican, it ends badly. I live in California too, my friend, in the LA area. You want to come downtown LA and walk the streets with me? Happy to do it. These problems have not been solved.
Mike, you live in a one-party state because the majority of people support the Democrats. Isn't that it?
Exactly.
No, we live in a one-party state because Los Angeles isn't stimulated to vote. That's the problem. It was talk about, look at yesterday, it's voter turnout. There's 9 million Democrats, 5.3 million Republicans, and 6.5 million no party preference. It's a large chunk of people that aren't getting information from either party. That's the problem in California.
Scotty, there was a point raised by Larry Elder earlier in the program in which he said Joe Biden, Obama, and the rest, they don't really care about Gavin Newsom or think that highly of him. They just want to protect the senatorial seat in California that may or may not be vacated by the somewhat elderly Dianne Feinstein. How important is that?
Oh, it's extremely important. Every Senate seat right now, when you're dealing with such a 50-50 and with Democrats barely having the majority of the Senate right now and controlling the House. Right now, everything is about 2022. Hence why, like I said, you saw the parade come through California at the last minute because they wanted to make sure this win, they could take credit for it and think that this was going to be able to what propels them into the 2022 elections, which is the exact opposite of what the rest of the country is. This is the reality of it. The rest of the country is not California. You do have a mixture. You have people that are very unhappy right now. And the situation with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, with the COVID policy lockdown, the economy starting to really suffer with a recession, right on the verge of it. There are some real issues that Democrats are going to hope to distract from. And this win right here is exactly what they were hoping they could use going into 2022. Because guess what? They don't have much in their arsenal right now. And Republicans are pretty much have the momentum behind them to defeat the party in power right now for basically the last 9 months of what this administration has done.
Steve, when you look forward to 2022, what do you see in California?
I guess, first of all, Scotty apparently hasn't read the polls with the Republican approval rating in Congress somewhere near the bottom of the poll of 25-30%. But this shows...
Depends on which poll you read, as we all know.
There's a lot of things that voters across the country can take from this, and that is the Democrats are on the right side of the issue of vaccinations and COVID. That was the #1 issue here. Our Republican friends are anti-vax, they're anti-mandate, and California voters across all parties rejected that. The strongest #1 reason keeping Gavin in office.
That
is a complete lie.
I don't know if you know this, but Donald Trump was the one who came up with the vaccine. So let's start with this. It's Donald Trump's vaccine, and he got, and Republicans are not anti-vax, and that's a complete lie, a narrative that you're going to try to spin.
Donald Trump.
No, it was Trump's vaccine. He was president when the vaccine was developed.
Okay, guys, I just want to hear from Steve, and then Micah comes straight to you. Steve, Donald Trump came up with a vaccine. I mean, it was Operation Warp Speed under his administration. What's so amusing about what Scotty said?
because Donald Trump did not come up with the vaccine. I think it was the private sector who came up with the vaccine, and Donald Trump supporters are the most resistant to the vaccine. So to try to link those two things together, it's kind of...
Well, I mean, I don't think she was saying that he sat in a laboratory with a white coat on inventing it by himself, but he created the conditions by which all the companies could get the green light and all the money and regulatory approval, emergency use authorization and so on to push it forward. I mean, that's clearly what she's saying, no?
I don't view it that way. I think most people in America view Donald Trump doing everything he could to not get America prepared for what happened with COVID. It was in denial for so long, and we still see that among the
difference between
okay, guys, we have to wrap.
And the actual vaccine.
I know, as all good Americans, you understand the word wrap and you respect it. Steve Maviglio, Mike Netter, Scotty Nell Hughes, thank you for that very frenetic debate. Much appreciated, and thank you. And at your homes and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.